some basics of doing perspectives and just walk you through a bunch of different tools and things that you would most likely be using when you're doing Photoshop. I'm also gonna ask Terry to post packages of the brushes that CL has given us because I'll be using some of those today to show some of the limits and extents of those. So when you're starting a Photoshop drawing, I guess I'll start with how you make a plan first. Going to like the place linked or place embedded, and that will bring in, you would go to find whichever file you're gonna use and start with bring in the plan and then bring in the aerial is a good place to start. The first tool I'll show you how to use is this move tool. So good for just moving things, realigning where things need to go when you're trying to scale things up and down. Shortcut to get that is Control-T. And then, so you can use it to move things down. And then if you want to resize, it's good to find a common point on it and clicking the Alt button and then clicking that anchor point to resize things to that point. And then you hold down Shift as it resizes to stay at the same scale. So you want to line it up to the aerial, however you want. You can also use it to rotate, and then you can use it to scale things up to an exact percentage if you want as well. And then going from there, the next thing you want to do would probably be to start filling in some of your blanks. So I like to use either hand drawings or AutoCAD where I just have black line work and making sure things are closed so that you can use Magic Wand tool to just, oh, sorry, something's in the way really quick. Let me see if I can move this. Okay, this tool here for the Magic Wand, it collects things in just a certain area you want. And then if you click this, it selects anything color. The tolerance will determine how strong the Magic Wand is. You can go up to 250, I think. And if you do 250, it just selects like everything in the drawing. If you go down to 10 or something lower, it will select just the portions you want. A little more you have something with color than what I'm doing right now. So I'll show you next how to use the Magic Wand to create scenery. So I want to take this grass and make it just the grass portions of my site. Taking that Magic Wand and using your Photoshop base or your AutoCAD or Work base to click the areas you want. Holding down Shift will add things to your selection. Holding down the minus will subtract things from your selection. So adding a couple things, and then if you put a file like this over top of it, you can then use this mask tool down the bottom right corner. And when you click on that, it takes all the selection and limits it to just that area. I use the mask tool almost all the time instead of using the like eraser tool or anything because it's really easy to go back and edit. And it's also good to add different edges on. So when you take your brush tool in black and white, you can take things away or add them back in by clicking X, which is, oh, making sure it's on the normal mode. It'll do that. So Control Z gets rid of things. Went a little too far. So mask tool is really helpful to get areas like that. And then, yeah, Shift, with the Magic Wand tool, Shift D will deselect everything. And then if you wanted this area or if you wanted all the area around it, Control Shift I will invert the selection. So instead it's all the area around that. So some more little helpful tips for that selection tool. And then once you have areas like these grassy areas, the next one I want to show is the burn tool, which is this little guy here. There's also the dodge tool and the sponge tool. Sponge will desaturate, the burn tool darkens, and the dodge tool will lighten things. So to add some depth into your drawing, I usually like to use the burn tool to add topography or what looks like topography and shadows and stuff. So that's a really helpful one to create realistic looking mounds. And then the dodge tool can help bring in light on top of them. So this is really good because once you've made a mask of just a texture that you put down, it's a good way to give some depth and make it look a little more realistic. So playing around a lot with that can eventually add something that, I can show you my finished one. I use that to create a lot of the darker areas like that to give it that depth. So, okay, next thing I wanted to show was adding like trees and drop shadows to your plan. So finding PNGs, wrong one. Finding PNGs, resizing things to go to the scale that you're working at. And then when you're adding in trees and things, you can hold down the Alt button and then just click on that and it multiplies it. So you can start popping those around your drawing. And then I always like to change the sizes and the orientation of them just to give it a little bit of diversity and make it look a little less duplicated when I'm drawing. And then a good way to go is to group the layers. Layer organization is really important. And then drop shadow is another helpful tool that I like to use to create shadows under the trees. It's a lot easier to do this than to physically use the burn tool and create a layer with them. So drop shadow is really cool because you can try to change the time of day and the angle that the shadow is coming in at. You can change the opacity, you can change the color of the shadow to give it a little more warmth or cool feeling to it, changing the spread of it, changing the size of it all, make it more pixelated with noise. So that's a really helpful tool to add some depth into your drawings as well. Make sure to always pay attention to the way the shadows are going on your base map, or if you're doing a perspective or something too, because that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when there's shadows going all different ways in a drawing. So that's pretty much a combination of just like using masks, using the burn tool, using trees and drop shadows. Eventually it'll turn into a finished plan with all of those. I also sometimes create layers solely for doing grass and things that all the brushes for. So this is when you can download Cl's plan using his grass ones. Yeah, he has some really cool brushes, so you can start also adding layers like that and creating your own if you want something that looks a little more hand-drawn instead of photorealistic. So that's pretty much all you need to know to make a plan is, to recap, having clothesline work that you can use the magic wand tool to select areas, using masks to select areas and put textures over those, or you can select areas and then just do, everything's popping up, sorry. If you're gonna go the hand-drawn route, you could select things and then do solid color and then fill areas in like that if you don't have textures that you're putting in. So eventually, after a lot of work, you can get something like this out of all of that. Might take a couple hours, but it's really worth it, especially if you don't have markers and everything to access. So if anyone has any questions on the plan, I can answer them. Otherwise, I'll move on to some tips in making perspectives.
So you said something about Cl's brushes.
Yeah. Cl made a whole bunch of brush packages that I'm going to have Terry share with you guys too, because Photoshop generally just comes with these top ones here, and then you can go online and download other ones, but Cl's made a couple that he shared with our class that have like grasses and leaves and different types of burn tools and dodge tools that can create some really cool textures and everything on a drawing. So
okay, thanks. We'd love to get those up in Alexandria. That'd be great.
yeah, he also has people too, which are really cool. So you can start putting in like silhouette people into your drawings, which I've been using a lot. I'll show you one of them. Yeah, it's got like things like that that can really help with the section or perspective as well. So it's a cool brush packet. I'll make sure you guys get access to it. Were there any other questions before I move on?
Just me saying thanks. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. So next I was going to do a couple tips with drawing perspectives. So if you have a base image like this, first I'll show you is the clone stamp tool. So this is a really helpful tool. Cls Brush kind of does the same thing to take things that you might not want in your drawing and kind of clean it up a little bit. So if you didn't want this lamp tool in it, you could select things and holding down Alt and selecting from the area you want to take from, and then putting it on top. And then messing around with things a lot, you kind of eventually get somewhere where you can get rid of anything in your drawing that you might not want, and just makes it look a little cleaner. Definitely takes an eye to be able to make sure you don't make any silly looking mistakes. But yes, that's a helpful tool to get rid of any of those undesirable things popping up. Next, I'll show you how to warp things in for a perspective grid. So if we wanted to put any of the floor plane, something different, using the Control T and then holding down Control and dragging, it warps things to be in a perspective grid instead of just your normal scaled grid. So paying attention to the way things are going in your drawing already and just kind of moving it to go in line with those perspective lines. Sometimes I'll draw on actual perspective lines to make sure I'm staying in the grid, especially if I wanted to do something like a planter down on the floor. So if I were putting a tree in and I wanted to give it soil, using the rectangle tool, well, actually first I'll do drawing with those perspective lines. And then you can use the rectangle tool to get rid of things, holding down that Control. And then you could fill it with a solid color and create what would look like soil down on the ground plane. And then start adding in texture using the brushes to create what looks like a planter and still go in line with the perspective. So a combination of those two, you can start to get the ground the way you want. Another thing that's helpful, the image adjustments, if you want to change the colors of things, this has a lot of different tools that you can play around with to get the color you want. So in this case, if I wanted to make the brick more like yellowish brown instead of the red that it is, I would use color balance, and taking the redness down just makes it a little more realistic looking, maybe popping up the yellow a bit to get the daytime that have a yellowish tree going in. So just to make it match the drawing. Other tools I use a lot in here, levels is good to get your whites their whitest and the blacks the blackest it could be. Brightness and contrast sounds just like what it is. Could be good for changing the time of day if you're doing something that would be in a darker setting versus a lighter. I use hue and saturation every once in a while just to bump up the saturation or bump down the saturation on things. But yeah, those are probably the four that I would use the most, and I imagine a lot of people use the most. I'll show you how to create shadows. At least this is how I do it. There might be better ways of doing it, but I know me and some others will usually just do, oh, hold on, I want to get the whole tree in. So if we want to add a shadow to the tree, using the magic wand tool to select the inside, Control-Shift-I, so you have just the tree, and then using the solid color to fill the tree up, choosing whatever color or shadow you might want for it, and then taking the Control-T and then holding onto this with the control, putting it down on the ground, make sure it lines up with the shadows in the background. The shadow's going this way, so you want to make sure that it's also going that way. Just kind of messing around with it for a while until you get it how you want. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And then,
pardon, what tool was that again?
That was just doing the Control-T to resize things, you mean? Or to select all of it and change it black?
Yeah, to make the shadow of the tree, pretty much.
That was using the
Magic wand.
The magic wand, selecting everything around, and then Control-Shift-I to get just the tree, and then using the solid color fill. And then to make it look like it's actually part of the ground, I usually mess around with a lot of these. Soft light is a good one, so you still get the texture underneath. You could take down the opacity, but that kind of just gets rid of the texture going there. So I usually mess around with overlays, soft light, hard light, different versions just to get that effect going. So next I'll show you a fun one of how to make rain. I've been doing a lot of rain renderings recently, so it's actually pretty easy to do. I usually start by creating just a black layer, and then taking the layer, you go to filter, noise, add noise. 34% is probably good. You can adjust it depending on how intense you want the rain to be. So we'll do about that right now. And then Control-T, you size it up by, I'll do like 400% to make those bigger rain droplets. And then enter. And then change it into screen. And that takes all of the black out and leaves just that part you've created. And then going into your filters again and going into blur, motion blur, setting the angle if you want the rain to come in a little more sideways angle or from straight up. So there's the rain part. Once you start doing a rain rendering too, you have to start paying attention to a lot more going on in the background. So usually I would take the background image and create a mask on it and start erasing the sky to make it look cloudy if it weren't already cloudy. So using your mask tool, you can start getting rid of things. You can find a gray sky online to put in the background, and then also paying attention to the ground plane. You probably would soften up some of the shadows using this tool, or you could use your brush tool. Oh, also Control, and then using your mouse, doing a right click can resize the size of your brush. Going up makes the brush softer, and going down makes it harder. So that's a really helpful time saver as well. So holding down Alt with the brush, it can start taking color and you can start getting rid of shadows and things on your ground plane. I would probably turn the shadow off of my tree because it wouldn't be like that if it were raining. I would take the brightness down on maybe the base image, my trees, my people, if it were raining. And then adding in the groundwater effect. I would find an image online like this that kind of shows like the splashing rain droplets I'm going for. Maybe resizing it to give it more of that perspective that I have going on, but something like this isn't quite as critical because once you put the overlay on, it won't be as noticeable. So overlay is a good one. Sometimes I mess around with different ones to kind of get that texture of things looking like they're splashing on the water. I've used subtract before, soft light, hard light, lighten or darken sometimes. Just kind of mess around with them until you get what you want out of it, and then creating masks and kind of getting rid of those areas that wouldn't have splashing going on top of them. So that's an easy way to do a rain rendering. Yeah, and it's pretty much just messing around with a lot of that and then getting things how you want them, using your perspective lines, paying attention to what's going on in the base image and making sure yours doesn't look super far out of place. And eventually, like I've done all of those. That's pretty much the only tools I'll use to get something like this. Along with a couple more of these, I blurred the background image using the lens blur to make sure it has a deeper perspective. I created my own layers for like sunlight and put them on a hard light overlay to kind of give it just some more depth and color into the drawing. I used to create these warped grids going on. Hold on, this is in the way. To create things like that, I'll use the distort and mess with I think I used the pinch coordinates on this one, or maybe just pinch. Yeah, the pinch here to get them to look a little warped. But yeah, those are pretty much all the tools you need to know, and then it's just the way you combine them and work around with them. And eventually you can get something really cool out of it. So if there's any other questions, I know I didn't cover everything, but I think those are a good place to start and start to just know your way around Photoshop. Once you start understanding just where things are, you can really just build off from there. So if there's any more questions.
There are some good places to find PNGs.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Where are some good places to find PNGs?
Oh, I really like using Mr. Cutout. I wonder if I could share my screen. I think I would have to stop sharing it. Let me go find their website really quick. Google Images is good for textures and sometimes other things that you want to find. But Mr. Cutout is definitely my favorite website to, let me share my screen with you, to find people and plants. So the really cool thing about Mr. Cutout is if you're looking for people or animals or anything like that, you can change what kind of space they might be in, the time of day, the activity they're doing, if they're facing towards you or away from you, the age, the ethnicity, their, what they're doing. So groups, crowds. So it's a really helpful tool to just kind of find those quick PNGs. They're all already cut out with the white gone. They have some, they have some interesting pictures. Skalkubar Images is another good one, but that one has a little less diversity going on. It's mostly just students in those, so it depends, but those are pretty high quality and have good people too. I could create a Google Drive that has the links to Cls Brushes and then also links like Skalkubar and Mr. Cutout if you guys would want those.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And regarding the layers that you had, is there anything specific you recommend when we're creating?
Definitely remember to label all of your layers. I usually like to group things a lot based on like ground plane stuff going on for a plan versus like canopy with all the trees. It's kind of up to you how you like to organize things. I usually, just do like textures on one for the ground plane. I can go try to find, so here I've merged a lot of my groups, but I had one for all of my lawns, which had like the mowed lawns, the longer grass. I had one for the concrete. I had, and the topo. So those I probably would move into just one group together. So you could turn off that ground plane by itself and get rid of those. Yeah, I had ones for the line work that I brought in. I had ones specifically meant for water, a group for people, groups for trees, a group for my structure that I put in. So I would just say it's up to you how you want to organize them, but just try to keep it as organized as possible because it turns into a really large file. You can merge the groups down together by right-clicking and just saying merge. So once you're done editing them, that's a good way to reduce your file size. Otherwise, it starts going really slow if you have a computer like mine. Does that answer your
Thank you.
question?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Do you have any resources to recommend for like learning other things about Photoshop? Like, do you got any YouTube channels or different places when you're stuck with a problem and want to figure out a way to render it nicely?
Mm-hmm. Linda is really good. They're free tutorials, and you can usually find one pretty specific on whichever problem you've run into. Besides that, that's the only one I've personally used. This would be a good moment if other people have recommendations. I've learned most of my Photoshop just by asking someone else who I know knows Photoshop pretty well. So I think people are a really good resource because sometimes it's hard to find a video that has everything you need. So if you guys ever need to shoot out an email to me or text me or something, I can also put my email and number in the Google Drive because hopefully I'll know how. And if I don't, I might know someone who does that I can ask. Does anyone else know any websites or anything that could be useful or YouTube channels?
There's a YouTube channel called Land Space Architecture, and it's got a lot of cool different just videos. It's not specifically just for realistic Photoshops, but it also has a lot of just other cool renderings specifically to a lot of things that we use.
Okay, cool. Thank you. What was it called? I want to write it down.
Land Space Architecture.
Okay.
They also have an Instagram. That's how I found them, but they post a lot of cool different YouTube videos of how to do a lot of like illustrations and things like that.
Okay. I know I follow an Instagram channel with it too. I think it's We Show It Better. Patrick turned me on to that one last year, and that has some good tutorials too. Were there any other questions?
To tie this into something that you're going to be talking about next week, how does this differ from some of the Photoshop designs that you would do while working in a firm? Is it different as a student?
I don't know. Everything, so I only started Photoshop like about a year ago, and I think a lot of the skills are really transferable from, I learned most of this from my internships and brought them into my student drawings. And I don't think it changes very much. You might change what you're using the tools for, but you pretty much use the same scope of tools, at least I did in the internships I was in, just to kind of get different things. But I think Photoshop, once you learn it, you'll kind of learn your style and what you are comfortable working with, and you'll apply it in everywhere you go. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we can wrap up the video and I'll start working on making that Google Drive. If there's any other questions, we can also make it just a shared Google Drive that people can just type in questions and we can all work to answer them if someone thinks of something at a later time they would need to know. And and I can work on adding those links and videos and everything that might help as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
I mean, for me
Yes.
personally, I'm really new to Photoshop, so I feel that any questions I have is more something basic that I should research on my own before. But,
I mean, I wouldn't
the tools you
bother
shared
you.
were very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to be free to ask any questions. I know it's a little more difficult to ask directly when we're not in studio together, but yeah, internet is a good source, but I always like having an actual person to go talk to, because sometimes you'll go searching for something for 45 minutes before you find the answer, when a person like me or someone else in your class might know it within 2 seconds.
Perfect, thank you.
It also might be fun to, Enma, to start off with just some photos or something simpler maybe, just to get used to those tools. That might be something to try.
Yeah, I think the first things I did on it were just editing photos. I also use After Effects too, which is a good one, but it just kind of gets you familiar with layering things and then using those tools on the top bar, like the effects and everything too.
It's like a
Good
good
hint.
tutorial thing.
Will you pick up your stuff at some?
Okay, well, that's all I had for you guys today. Thanks for showing up. I hope it was helpful, or hope that at some point you can look back at this and it will be helpful. But yeah, Photoshop's a really good tool and I highly recommend it. It's definitely something a lot of firms really want to see in your portfolio, and it can help make really finished final drawings that look good in a portfolio. So thanks, guys.